standing there looking down, my palms sweaty, my breathing I just could not even catch my breath. Looking down, just waiting to see what was on the other side. And y'all, I'm not even talking about like jumping off a cliff or anything. I'm just talking about opening my junk drawer or any of those other bins that I had no idea what was in it. Y'all, it was stressful and I needed to face it. Let's talk more about that coming up next. Well, hello friends, I'm Mary Beth with the At What Cost blog, and here we are learning to apply God's truths to our everyday lives. And the best way that we have done that is by embracing a more minimalistic lifestyle in our home. And yes, that I think was a little dramatic, but it's not untrue. It was stressful decluttering our home, and let's talk about how we can face that stress head on, embrace maintenance, and there'll be a little bonus tip at the end. Let's start with this idea of acute stress. So the stress that is right there at the surface that wells up when we anticipate this kind of dreaded task, or even the motivation that we feel. I know for me, the rage purge was a pretty regular thing around our house in the beginning. I would get so fed up with an area, I would be just kind of ready to get all of it out, and I felt like I could move through it quickly. I could make decisions easily. I just was done. And I would imagine you may have felt that way about some of the areas of your home, but at other times I would be confronted with a task and feel stressed out before I ever even started. That sort of adrenaline rush is really part of the fight or flight mechanism that our body does naturally to deal with stress as we encounter it. So it's not a bad thing for us to feel that sort of physical response to stress. What really matters is what we do with it. Slowing down and recognizing that that's what's happening with our body can really be beneficial in harnessing that motivation to keep moving forward as we're faced with what may feel like a somewhat overwhelming task. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have what's considered to be chronic stress. So this is the type of stress that basically just drains you and really compromises most of your systems over time. And for me, I could really relate to that idea of feeling drained. It didn't seem like such a big deal that I always had dishes piled up, or there was always a few bins of this or that laying around. There were closets that I didn't want anyone to look in, or bedrooms that I would close the door to when people were coming over. And having that kind of low level of stress always hanging around, lurking around the corner, really began to wear on me. And you may have found this in other areas too. Typically, chronic stress from all kinds of different areas we see has an effect on the body. It actually will affect all of our major systems. And so this is where we get stress-induced illnesses, and it really can be difficult for us to function long-term living under that kind of stress. So when it comes to facing a task of decluttering, or really anything for that matter that we anticipate is going to be a little bit stressful, being mindful of our response and the likelihood that we will experience chronic stress from this particular area of our home, event, or situation, understanding that and figuring out the best path moving forward is really going to be what propels us into changing our environment and experiencing this type of life that we would really like to have if XYZ weren't happening. So let's talk about a few examples of what we can do when we're faced with some of these issues. Let's say we have a ton of craft projects that we'd really like to do at some point, but this season of life just doesn't allow for that. The anticipation of getting rid of some of those craft supplies may really start to well up in us some more negative feelings. When we think about decluttering them, it may actually send us into that kind of fight or flight mode. But rather than leaving them there and walking away to escape those feelings of stress or overwhelm, we are really setting ourselves up for that long-term chronic stress. Because every time we look at them, we're going to be reminded that we spent money on something that we're not using, there's something useful there that nobody's using, or it's taking up space that we could really use for something else. Are you starting to kind of see the difference between facing the task head on, prepared, understanding that mechanically our body is going to help us move through this, and leaving the task to continually drain us over time and just become more and more difficult? There is a popular book that I read several years ago on productivity. It has been around for a while and it has recently kind of resurfaced, that talks about eating a frog. And this is really the example of having this task that feels overwhelming. We just go ahead and hit it head on, we get it out of the way, and on the other side of that feel much more productive versus seeing that task on our to-do list, hanging around, giving us those feelings of dread and that guilt of knowing that it's undone that just slowly drains our system. So I want to encourage you to listen to your body and remember how things really are. What is your current reality? Even though you may be exhausted, are you able to take 2 minutes to sort through that pile of magazines? Even though you're tired and feeling overwhelmed, can you take 5 minutes to go ahead and wash one sink full of dishes? If you've ever heard the example of someone holding a glass of water, they may ask, how heavy is it? Well, of course, we can take a measurement of how heavy it actually is, but the weight that we feel of that glass changes over time. So if you have to hold a glass of water for 30 seconds, it may not feel like all that bad of a task. But if you have to continually carry that glass of water around for several minutes or maybe even hours, the weight of that glass continues to grow. And the same is true about our stress. Maybe it's time to make the choice to move from that place of draining chronic stress that we find in our homes with all of these things that just tend to be hanging around, and really facing it head on for that short-term burst of acute stress that our body is naturally going to help us recover from. Now that we have identified a couple of types of stress and how we can sort of deal with it, I want to talk now about maintenance mode, because I think it's a destination that we all feel like we're supposed to get to with decluttering, that we're just going to keep pushing through the hard stuff and eventually we'll know when it's time to stop and we'll just be able to maintain. And while that is true, we will get to a point where all of this is under control and it just becomes second nature to keep what matters and let go of what doesn't. But until then, we want to experience this idea of maintenance all the way through our decluttering journey. So I want to tell you about my junk drawer. Now, this is one of my best examples of enjoying maintenance along the way and staying motivated to keep going in the other areas of our home. And yeah, that's a lot to put on a junk drawer, but seriously, this is one of my favorite drawers, one of my favorite areas of our home that I go back to when I need a reminder that things are going to get better in our home. So initially I did a good first pass of our junk drawer, and y'all, it was pretty bad. And I only was using the first 2 inches or so of that drawer on a regular basis. I would typically only open that drawer far enough to grab a permanent marker out of the drawer and write on the bag that the kids had snacked that day. The rest of the items in that drawer were just completely unknown. I had no idea what was actually in there, which meant anytime I was looking for something, there was a good possibility that it had been shoved in that drawer and I was going to have to open it and look for it. It was stressful. It shouldn't be. A drawer should not stress me out, but it also should not make me as happy as it does. So, there's balance, right? If I had not worked hard on maintenance for that junk drawer, it would have just collected items again and again, and the level of confidence that I had going into other areas of our home would definitely not have been what it is, knowing that I can declutter a space and maintain it. So again, that is really where our motivation comes from. Does it feel good to get rid of things? Yeah, sometimes it does feel downright stressful, and we feel better about it on the other side. But the long-term motivation that is going to start to eliminate any of that chronic stress that we feel dealing with items in our home is really going to come from maintenance over time and building trust again in ourselves that we can handle the everyday problems that we face in our home. So here's the bonus tip. All of this maintenance is going to give us a little more time. And it's important that we figure out what we're going to do with that time. Now, it's going to be filled. We want to fill it with things that are going to bring us life. If you have spent any time on this channel, you probably have figured out what I think is going to bring you the most life. And of course, it's God's word. All of this maintenance is going to free up time for us to be able to spend that time in a different way. Now, for me, it was in Bible study and being able to really dive deeply into Bible study. Now, there is an abundant life that Christ is offering us, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of getting rid of the things that have become distractions and keep us from experiencing that fellowship with Him. I didn't realize this at first. I really thought that if I had more and better systems in my home to manage all of the things that I had, I would be happier and it would feel more joyful to serve the Lord in my home. Unfortunately, that was never really the case. It really was not until I really paid the price of experiencing some of that stress, knowing that on the other side of it, I was going to have time to do the things that really brought me life. That was more motivating than anything. Not having to spend 2 hours every day working on dishes or cleaning up messes all over our house, shuffling my stuff from one corner to another, was replaced with time in God's Word. I began to connect passages from the Old Testament and the New Testament that really helped me to see the way that God's promises have been kept over and over and over again. The more I studied, the more I was able to see the way that God fulfills those promises even in my own life today. So I would encourage you that as you continue facing these more stressful things in your home, and maybe feeling some of that stress in a way that isn't always pleasant, that you would take time to maintain those items, but also to refill your cup with living water and refill your cup with a source that is only ever going to bring you life. I'm so glad that you stopped by today, and if you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel. You can do that by clicking the button right down here. And you can find me here every Friday with another family minimalism video and every Sunday with a study tip for deepening our study of God's Word. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.